mental health. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
And this is kind of it's kind of interesting for me. I was like last night I was doing a little research on just kind of getting a feel for what's going on as far as trends and what's going on in terms of people. It's weird because I remember when I was younger, I really never heard of people having issues so much. I mean, occasionally I would hear something like somebody had a nervous breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
Aunt Shirley had a nervous breakdown. I was like, what is that? What is a nervous breakdown?
Yeah.
I didn't quite understand it. But it's not until later on in life that I started realizing, especially in the last few years, that you've seen a lot of people stressed out, having, panic attacks and depressed. And I've had friends that, that are manic depressive or, they're bipolar. And I mean, and it's like I'm seeing it more and more and more as I get older. And so, I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
A couple things. The first thing that always comes to mind with me is that, back in the day, we hid a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Period. Children, you ain't gonna know stuff. They ain't gonna talk about that. Oh, someone went off to college for a while. They were in jail.
You're right about that.
We ain't gonna say somebody in jail that they're in college. They'll be doing college in about 10 years.
Yeah. Like it's like your daddy left to go to work. Yeah, well, yeah.
Go to work.
We haven't seen him in 20 years. Yeah, he's still at work.
Yeah. So that's kind of the stuff we would do. So you say someone has a nervous breakdown. And they say that because, they actually had to be hospitalized or something like that. So it wasn't accepted. Mental health issues were often kept as a secret, something to be ashamed of.
Yeah.
I don't know. When I look through the DSM, that's what's the Diagnostic Statistics Manual. I'm not sure if that's the right name, but that's the book we use to diagnose people.
Mm-hmm.
You could probably diagnose everybody with something if it actually came down to it. So first of all, because we all have our struggles as part of life.
Yeah.
So I think it's starting to be more accepted. Now, I think what was more troubling, I'll say in the religious community and in the African-American community, well, probably in the African-American community is this, our distrust of medical systems, period. When you start going back to the history of the Tuskegee experiment and different things like that, we have an inherent distrust of the medical profession because of the history and how we were used in experimentation. Think about it even now. I don't know if you've heard about this, but sometimes they're talking about COVID-19 and vaccines and different things like that. How many people, said, are you going to take that? I'm not going to take it.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say that. Yeah. No, I'm not going to be the guinea pig.
Yeah, I'm not going to be the guinea pig. Yeah, don't test me out on that. So there is a lot of that. And when you combine that in many ways in mental health, there is a cultural bias, then it creates more mistrust. I'll use this as an example. PTSD, you're talking about people dealing with trauma or something like that.
Yeah.
So let's say you grew up in the hood. Like when I grew up in LA, for instance. I spent part of my time in gang territories. You got the Bloods on one place, you got the Crips on one place, you got to cross. And so if you're crossing territories and you don't know nobody, you moving with your head, you swimming sometimes, just because you have to be careful.
Yeah.
Or if you got to fight sometimes, protect yourself, do whatever else. Now you take that and you put it in another context. Maybe come to Georgia or something like that. And you're looking around, swiveling your head, and someone wants to get at you and you're ready to fight or something like that. Just saying that as an example.
Yeah.
Someone might say, okay, you got a mental illness. No, what has happened is the background you were previously in, those were survival skills that you had. Mm-hmm. And so you're in a different environment and you got to learn to adjust to the different environment. But probably what the tough part is the old conditioning is still there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And I use that as part of the mental health thing, but we can even talk about that in faith. When we become a new creature in Christ, old things are passed away, all things become new. Part of that is a faith statement because we still have that old mindset about thinking about things.
Yeah.
Our mind has to be renewed.
Yeah. Yeah, I was looking at these statistics last night. This is from the Mental Health First Aid. I don't know if you ever heard of that or not. It was online. They were saying these are some of the statistics that I was reading. It says in the United States, almost half of adults, that's 46.4%, will experience a mental illness during their lifetime. And it says 5% of adults 18 or older experience a mental illness in any 1 year, equivalent to 43.8 million people. Then it says also of all adults in the United States with any mental disorder in a 1 year period, 14.4% have one disorder, 5.8% have two disorders, and 6% have three or more disorders. And then it also said half of the mental disorders begin by age 14. I was like, dang, and 3/4 by age 24. And I always thought this was like an old, a thing that really affect older people. But when I saw that statistic, I was like, dang. And then finally it says, and in the United States, only 41% of the people who've had mental disorder in the past year receive professional health care or other service. And that leads back to what you said about in our community is like, even if we have it, we're not going to go, seek help for it. We just kind of have to deal with it, unfortunately.
Yeah, you have to deal with it, unfortunately. And then sometimes when you talk about like 14, 15, 16, I like to say where we grow up is often considered normal to us.
Yeah.
It may not be normative as society as whole, but it's considered normal to us. I remember I was sitting in class, I think I was in an ethics class like years ago when I was taking it, and one of the ladies talked about, the teacher, she was talking about having a young lady, and actually she grew up in LA, so it was funny. She was talking about this young lady was with her and she wore blue constantly. And whatever it is, and she was going to explore and ask her about that. But the funny thing was I finished her sentence and said, how do you know that? I said, if she grew up in the gang territory in a certain place, she wore that to keep safe and to represent her set. At least that's the term we use at the time.
Yeah.
So she's all the way in Georgia now. But because she grew up 5, 6, 7, family may have grown up in that and whatever else, this is ingrained in her, such to the point that she wears that, A, to identify with the people that she was with, and B, to keep safe, even though it might have not been necessary in the part where she was staying.
Yeah.
But see, that was normal for her. A lot of us grow up in family systems where there's alcohol, where there's abuse, where there's different things like that. And until something happens that shakes up our lives, we often think that's normative behavior.
Yeah.
And so many times when you come to someone like me or a counselor or a therapist or a psychologist or something, one of the things we're doing is trying to understand your background, where you're from, but also give you ideas on how to cope or how to change behaviors so you're not destroying yourself or your family.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense because I was looking too that I guess we all, I guess the way I was trying to define was because that mental illness or mental health is kind of a loose term or a very broad term. Mm-hmm. And, and a lot of times when you say that when you mention mental illness is really at an extreme case, I guess we all have experienced some type of mental illness in our lifetime. I remember back even at Tech, there was a period of time where I was like really, really depressed about I was just depressed. I hated school. I hated my life. Mm-hmm. And I mean, even to the point where I contemplated suicide, for a short period of time. Mm-hmm. But I guess that was a case of mental illness in one sense, because I guess all the pressures that were going on in my life at the time. So I guess we all have kind of experienced, some form of challenge. And I looked at this list of what mental illness encompasses, and this is probably not exhaustive, but I was just looking at it, just all the different things that they talked about it. Yeah. And it's like anxiety disorder, mood disorder, ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, autism spectrum disorder, binge eating, bipolar. That one I knew about. Borderline personality disorder, bulimia, eating disorders, generalized anxiety, major depression, panic disorder, personality disorders, schizophrenia, serious mental illness, social phobia. I mean, and the list goes on. I mean, it can keep going on, but I said, well, that's the case. I think everybody's kind of experienced a little bit of that throughout their lifetime.
Yeah.
And how do you, I guess the case is, there's the part of it that's not too extreme where you can still be effective in your work and your life. And then there's another part of it where it actually stops you from being effective on being able to socialize or just work on those things. So how do you deal with identifying those types of things where it gets to the point where, you're struggling, and how does a person get help for that?
Well, just looking at that, like you said, there's a huge list. Wait a moment. I actually have my DSM here. I don't know if you can see. You see how thick this thing is.
So this is what I have right here. This little sheet of paper. So I am no expert, but even that overwhelmed me when I saw that list. I'm like, dang.
Yeah. And so a lot of it, I would say, first of all, is how it's affecting your life functioning. So let's take an example for this, COVID, because we're all in the house or different things like that.
That'd be a good
one. If you're in the house, for example, with your family, and you notice yourself, I'll just use this one, getting angry a lot quicker. You're snapping at the wife, you're snapping at the kids, you're snapping at this, all of a sudden you're noticing that's an indication that something could be going on. Mm-hmm. And so using that for an example, and let's say I saw someone who was coming in and they would notice, okay, they're snapping, they're angry, this, that, and something. I would probably talk to them about their background, their history, tell me a little bit of what's going on, trying to get a general picture of their life. Mm-hmm. Then afterward, I would ask them what's going on specifically. Okay, like if you're using anger for 7, what's going on when you're getting angry? Or say, well, my kid keeps bugging me while I'm trying to work. I'm trying to work and do this, and I got this deadline going on. So I said, okay, all right. So you let out your anger on your kid. All right. So tell me about how your relationship with that normally. And sometimes people will realize maybe my relationship is normally good, but there's some additional stressors that are taking me over the top. What I like to say in a lot of instances when you're dealing with anxiety, depression, or different things, there are different life changes or pressures that are causing us to react in certain ways. Mm-hmm. And everybody might act a little different. Like, for instance, what might cause you anxiety or fear may not be the same thing that causes me anxiety or fear, but it's something that we can relate to because we may have both experienced it at one time or the other.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's working with people or walking with people, helping them to understand what their triggers are and do certain things, sometimes giving them tools to cope in the moment, but then tools to cope long term.
Yeah.